Hey there folks, this is Will Collins from Arts Council Wood Buffalo, and we're here tonight to talk about making it in music as part of the Business of the Arts program. I'm here right now with four of Alberta's top professional musicians, and we're going to talk about music, we're going to talk about the craft, we're going to talk about some of the fun stuff of being a musician, but we're also going to kind of talk a little bit about the business and what it means to be a musician and in the business. So today I've got Mr. Dan Gillies, local musician whom some of you might know. Got Thom Bennett, got Mike Lent, and I've got Ryan Davidson. So welcome guys, thanks for coming out today, and let's talk about music, right?
Yeah.
So before we get into the conversation, if you could just maybe introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about yourself and what you play. And then we'll get into the conversation. So, do you want to start?
Sure, yeah. Dan Gillies, local musician since 2008 in Fort McMurray. Been working as a musician and as a teacher for that whole time, which has been really cool in Fort McMurray. And play a number of instruments, but guitar is my main axe.
I'm Thom Bennett, based out of Edmonton. I've been a professional musician for 18 years now. Mostly play drums. I also compose. I'm an educator, sometimes producer, engineer as well.
My name is Mike Lent. I'm from Edmonton as well. I've been playing I guess I'm the elder statesman probably here. I've been playing for about 40 years professionally and have been blessed to be able to play with some great artists, and including these gentlemen here, and basically lived and basically made my living by playing music, which isn't that easy all the time. But very pleased to be here and look forward to playing with you guys tomorrow night.
Yeah.
My name is Ryan Davidson. I'm an Edmonton-based guitarist and composer, and I've been a professional musician for 25 years, and I'm very happy to be here.
Thanks for coming, guys. So, interestingly enough, Thom, you and I have known each other for a little while now, because
13 years.
Thom comes to this region quite a bit. You've been coming here at least for 12 years now, and maybe you could tell us a little bit about some of your beginnings and how you ended up coming to Fort McMurray.
Sure, yeah. Initially in 2007, I started flying up to Fort Mac to teach at the college here as the percussion professor. Did that for 3 years, helped set up the recording program here as well, the curriculum and the studio space. And then I was really lucky during my time up here to meet some fantastic artists in a bunch of different disciplines at the college, but then great musicians like yourself and Dan and Dennis and
oh man, list goes on.
Yeah, got to play with a lot of these folks either through events at the college or also doing some corporate work in the community or club shows as well. And then when I stopped teaching here in 2009, because of the connections we had made with some of the schools here and some of the musicians, I would still come up probably 3 or 4 times a year for gigs, and then every year or two I'll come up and bring some great musicians like these guys, and we'll do some clinics with local schools, and then stuff for the ACWB the last, I think, 6 years as well too.
Cool.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah. And I was just going to say, Thom has been on every big event I think that we've had in Fort McMurray. I think of the grand opening of the airport, the international airport.
Right.
I think of the Summer Games, 2015 Summer Games,
Right.
just as 2 things. So every time you think of this was a big event in Fort McMurray, Tom's been there.
Right.
I think we've brought you.
I've been lucky enough to be
every time
for sure. Yeah.
So.
Well, Ryan, you were talking about this yesterday. You come up here a fair bit as well. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your experiences coming up and gigging in Fort McMurray area?
Sure, I started coming here to play at the Oil Can in the Riviera, for those people who are old enough to remember that, back in about 1995, I would have been.
Wow.
Continued to play at those places all the way until, I don't know how long ago the Oil Can closed.
Right.
And then we started playing at Boomtown Casino, which is where we're at this weekend also. And I'm also here with Gore Bamford occasionally, which will be coming through here, I'm fairly certain, on the next tour in the next few months here. And there was one lone concert with Kenny Hess, for those people who know Kenny Hess up here, opening from Roe Haggard at the arena here.
Nice.
Cool.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's too cool.
So, Mike, you mentioned that you're maybe the sort of the
Elder
grand.
statesman?
I don't want the elder statesman. Yes. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got started in music
Yeah.
and maybe
Well,
your beginnings?
I come from a fairly musical family, and I remember my brother bringing home a guitar in the late 60s, and that was like, wow, that was pretty cool. My dad, was wondering, well, what about hockey? But, anyways, so through my brothers and my sisters, I kind of started playing, and I was lucky to be at that time where when I went into junior high and in high school, there was a great music program. So I learned how to read right away, which my older brothers and sisters didn't really know. They were very good musicians, and you don't need to read to necessarily be a great musician or good musician. But so then I learned how to read, and I went to Grant MacEwan after that, and then I started playing a lot of pop music all the way through that too, not just of one style. So I played with Katie for a couple of years. We did the Ingenue tour all over the world, and then did some amazing shows. My first show with Katie was the Johnny Carson show.
Wow.
Oh, that's nuts.
And it was his last 20 shows, so he picked all the musical artists. So he loved Katie. So that was my first show with her. But anyways, we did that tour for a couple of years. Then Jan Arden, I've been working with her for 20 years plus, and wrote some music with her. But all at the same time, like wanting to play jazz, So that's my passion, I think. But I've been up here a few times, not as many as you, Ryan, or you gentlemen, but it's interesting that it's really changed a lot up here. I remember coming up here years ago, but only for the occasional gig. But it's great. It's nice to see. I remember coming up with Thom to Piano College.
Yeah.
We did a concert. But I hope they can get this thing rolling and get music back into the college here.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Yeah.
Big time.
Well, there's a lot going on usually in town, so we're pretty lucky for that.
Yeah.
We have a lot of great musicians coming to town, right? So thanks for talking about your adventures, and we also have local hero Dan Gillies.
Local hero.
Local hero.
Love it.
What are your? How did you get started? What was your sort of? How did you
man.
know that guitar was your thing?
Oh my gosh, man. We all have, I was sitting here and I was listening to this record and I heard this sound and it was, that's an electric guitar. And I actually remember that it was a tune, just with some power chords. I'm like, I love this, I want this. I used my mom's old Japanese Ibanez acoustic. That was my first, and I have it still hanging in my teaching studio. It's a Japanese no-name knockoff hybrid of a Gretchen at 335. That was like my first guitars. And then I very much like yourself, Mike, I got into the band programs in school. It was in that era where like bands were rock, alternative 90s grunge bands were cool.
Yeah,
so I had a punk band. I was playing the Battle of the Bands. I was, recording cassettes and all this stuff. And so just slept and ate and breathed music, all through high school. I started playing at church too, which was great. They were cool with electric guitar, and it was like, playing with people that were older than you and better than you and really good. This is where I got to play with piano players and, violin or cello and like not 90s alternative rock groups, if you will. And then, just was super blessed, to use your word, Mike, to be immersed in this. And that's all I remember from my entire junior high school, and college is just guitar player, musician. I did go to Grant MacEwan as well, ever since, I can't really remember life before the guitar, which is so cool.
Wow.
Was there ever a point where you said, "This is my career path"? Where you was like, "I've decided this moment, this is it"?
I feel like it was the band in high school. It's like, we're going to make t-shirts and this is the bus we're going to use. But meanwhile, my mom was like already like, no, we're going to the community college for a music diploma. Oh, okay. So there was, I think my mom booked the interview when I was 18 or audition, but anyway.
Wow, cool. So Ryan, you're also a guitar player.
Yep.
Was there ever a point, like, was guitar your first instrument, or is there anything else you play, or what led you down the path of music?
I don't play anything else. When I was 5, on my birthday, I said, I want to play guitar, and my parents said, oh, so you want to sing? No, I want to play guitar, and because our neighbors had introduced me to opera at the time, I thought taking classical guitar would probably be the best route, probably learn the most. So, Christmas 1980, my parents got this guitar for me, and so overjoyed. Started taking classical guitar lessons, and in the early teens, I heard Van Halen 1. And I have it on vinyl. I bought it from like a record store, and I went, "What is that? I want to do that." And that I don't really have a memory of never playing guitar. I don't even know why I decided to do that. I just, for some reason, got it in my mind that it was going to be that and not hockey at the time, which I was also doing. So.
I have to ask Brian a question.
Yeah, sure.
So after you had a classical guitar first when you were first taking lessons, and then you heard Van Halen, what was your first electric guitar?
My first electric guitar was an imitation Les Paul. It was a Raven.
Okay.
And we bought that and an old late 60s United amplifier. We bought both of them for $150 from which was, even for stuff like that, was a steal in the 80s.
Yeah.
And now, kind of maybe as a trip down Amnesia Lane, I bought an actual Les Paul. It's exactly the same as the first one I had. That's the one I play with on the Gore Bamford shows, is that black Les Paul, because it kind of reminds me of the first one I had.
Oh, I love it. That's
so cool.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So a couple of you have mentioned Grant McEwen already. So talking about music and business and becoming a professional, do you think going to school is a necessity? What's your feeling about going to school? What do you think, Thom?
It was very beneficial for me, and specifically at that time, because I had not taken any lessons really.
Right.
And I really was looking, in retrospect, I was looking for an anchor in my life at that point, like a purpose and a passion and some kind of discipline. And going to McEwen and seeing all of the other great musicians that were there really kind of inspired me. And actually the instructors there too, there were two that really stood out to me, Bobby Cairns and Charlie Austin. I just saw the facility they had on their instrument, and I had never thought, I thought that was reserved for just the superstars, and in my mind they are superstars, but they just made it seem attainable, and there was like a route to get there through hard work and education. When you talk about the business side of it, I'm not sure I learned much about that until I got out into the real world. And I know McEwen and other universities, especially with the changing times of the music industry, have really stressed the business side more. And I actually think that's a really good thing. I can think of a great bass player in Calgary who took private lessons to get to the level that he's at, but he actually has a business degree. He runs a very successful label, gigs quite a bit. He's very entrepreneurial, and for better or for worse, I feel like the industry has kind of moved more towards that model and less away from maybe what was there before. So for me, it was totally good to go and socialize, meet all these people, get inspired by these people. But in terms of the business side of it, I think for me, I had to get out into the real world and kind of cut my teeth and learn through experience in that sense.
Right. Do you have any sort of pointers or tips for somebody who's maybe just finishing school, what they might start with? What they might start with? For example, do they need a website, or should they learn accounting? Any sort of tips you might think of in that case?
I was such a late bloomer on my instrument that I was so overwhelmed with how much work I had to do just on the instrument alone to feel competent. That I didn't really worry about that stuff probably for another 8 years.
Right.
But probably the one piece of advice that I would give is, especially in the beginning years, don't have an idea in your mind of exactly what your career is going to be like or what kind of music you want to pursue. I was offered a gig right out of school that was a regular weekly gig with a jazz choir. And in my like snobby like music school mind, I was like, oh man, jazz choir, I don't want to do that. But it's a gig and I'll take it. And then I did it, and then I was opened up to this like infinitely beautiful world of 20 people singing really complex chords, and also being able to accompany a singer at a really quiet dynamic, but still keeping that rhythmic propulsion there, but at a quieter level than I had ever been able to do it before. And that gig kicked my ass because I was surrounded by all this beautiful music that I wasn't exposed to before, and it made me get better at the instrument and try and adapt for that gig. So for me, the biggest piece of advice I would give, it's not like a business piece of advice. It would just be stay as open-minded as possible, especially in the beginning years of your career.
I think that's a great point, and actually that reminds me, I wanted to ask about different genres of music. So Mike, you mentioned earlier that you love jazz. But you've also played with Katie Lang and Jan Arden.
Yeah.
You know,
maybe it's the nature of my instrument too. I played electric bass, but I wanted to play acoustic bass. Mm-hmm. And my dad, I remember we watched the Merv Griffin show, and he said, "You know who that bass player is playing?" And I said, "No." And it was Ray Brown, who's a phenomenal bass player, American bass player. And that was the first book I got for acoustic bass was Ray Brown's Bass Method. It's like, but I think that I don't know if it's the nature of the instrument, but I was fortunate to be able to play because of my brothers and stuff. I listened to a lot of different kinds of music. Americana, Canadian bands like the Band and all that, the folk stuff. I was introduced to, but I just loved jazz. That's why I went to Grant MacEwan, because I heard Jaco Pastorius and I went, what? I want to be able to solo. Like I was playing, nothing against country music and stuff like that, but it's 1/5. The older stuff was 1/5. Now it's a lot more integrated with rock and pop music in general. But I wanted to be able to express myself, and we were talking about this yesterday in a clinic. That sort of was the cool thing about jazz, is that doesn't matter what instrument you play, you can actually be the soloist, and you don't have one specific role. It's kind of dispersed, and you have different roles. But anyways, so I feel very fortunate that I've been able to play both, and it also kept me busy. As a professional, it was I can go record. Where if you just play upright bass and that's all you do, or a certain specific genre of music, it kind of closes doors. And so I've always been kind of busy. I was telling Thom, it also works the other way, where guys go, well, you're not really a pure player because you play all this different kind of stuff, right? Mm. But I think it helps financially. And also just being a well-rounded musician. And let's face it, I think music has it's gone to a world place, where we need to learn about all kinds of, in not just music, in general,
right.
Mm-hmm.
And living in an internet age makes it a lot easier to find things on YouTube or Spotify or
it's amazing,
whatever, right?
What you can learn on, we were talking about that. I was saying, well, I used to get this Music -1 on records, and you could take out the bass, and I could play along with this piano player and drummer, and then, of course, Ryan said, well, yeah, I can do that with my phone. I went, oh yeah, that's right. Anyways.
That's great. So the three of you have a trio project together now.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. We've played in a variety of settings with one another, probably for, when's the first time I played with you? Probably that concert here just before that, so probably a dozen years. And then Ryan, you moved back in 2010.
Yep.
So maybe 12 or 15 years with Mike and 10 with Ryan. And you guys have worked together before on certain things, but I just kind of wanted to put a group together with the three of us. So it happened pretty organically. Just we had known each other and played with each other in various settings, but never as this group playing this kind of music. And I think the thing that I feel so blessed to play with these guys. Like, you know, their resumes, like they speak for themselves and their reputations. But because they're both so open-minded about the different kinds of music that they play, to me, like the jazz word is, I think a lot of people just think of like swingy stuff from the 50s and like a crooner. And these guys bring so many sensibilities from other kinds of music into jazz, which to me is like it's an umbrella genre in that it kind of accepts all other genres in it as long as there's an element of improvisation in there. And I hate that word fusion, but really it is it's a fusion of all these different styles. And these guys are so hip to so many different bags that we can jump from, like you saw last night, like, you know, kind of like a proggy Johnny Cash spaghetti western sound with, you know, like an annoying drum solo at the end, and then we can do Brazilian music, and then we can play straight ahead swing stuff and blues and, you know, some film kind of music. We can reinvent some standards if we want to. And these guys are just so good that you can throw whatever you want at them and it's gonna feel good. They're going to understand the vibe of all of those different kinds of music.
Right.
And so that's why I wanted to put a group together with them.
Right. And so if we haven't said it before, Modern Times Trio is the group name.
Yeah.
Playing Johnny Cash, Radiohead, from what I recall, you know, some modern stuff, right? Thinking about your audience, was there, or even just as a business plan, was there a reason for choosing modern music and putting this spin on it? Or is this more of a musical evolution and musical exploration? What do you think,
I think
Mike?
so, yeah, I think so, because like we were talking, I think music's gotten so broad in the spectrum of different genres and how you can utilize, you know, the Indian music, you know, African, of course, that's always been there, but I think it's even more prevalent, like when you hear like some of the guys from New York that are jazz guys, but they're playing, you know, pop songs with, you know, different, you know, feelings and but we were even saying like Miles did this with Cyndi Lauper's song Time After Time, you know, years ago. So maybe, you know, he helped to push it along, and he definitely did.
Right.
But we're not here for the history class necessarily. But yeah, I think that I think it's a natural will. I think it's a natural evolution of the sign of the times. And maybe it was happening a little bit before, but I think that you'd agree if you go out and hear improvising groups, they'll be utilizing like world music, like anything they can, right?
Yeah, it's like a means to an end to kind of express yourself.
And to be part of that is really cool. Like,
what kind of a reaction are you getting from your audience? Are they feeling like they're more identifying with it because it's not just Duke Ellington or something they've never heard before, or when they're hearing a melody and they're like, wait a minute, that's Radiohead? What kind of a reaction do you get from your audiences, Ryan, when that happens?
Well, I think they identify with it more because depending on the demographic, of course, certain people will know who Radiohead is. A different demographic will know who Johnny Cash is. Sometimes they overlap, sometimes not. But it's not really that different from what jazz has kind of been doing for a long time, which is, you know, we play the standards from the 40s. I mean, those were the popular music of the time. Now they're standards. Where, you know, if you went to a movie in 1945 and saw Anchors Away and saw Frank Sinatra singing I Fall in Love Too Easily, that is a standard.
Right.
But at the time, that was popular music. So now we're not really doing anything that's really that far-fetched from what that is. We're just trying to present it in a way that maybe it brings jazz into more of an accessible format for people, younger people.
Right. So, moving towards a bit of more of a business focus, you guys play some cover songs like we were discussing, but you also play originals, like songs that you've composed or arranged. How important is publishing in being a successful business musician?
Go ahead, Tom.
I think I'm going to defer to Mike here since he actually has some more published stuff. It's kind of a weird time. I would say, I don't know if you guys all feel this way too, in terms of royalties from publishing, because the avenues where that would make a financial difference to you, record sales and radio play, have been replaced by free music for everybody whenever they want it on their phone.
Right.
So I think radio plays, royalties you're seeing from that are less, and I don't know if people really buy physical copies anymore, except for just maybe a novelty as a vinyl.
I think that it definitely has changed, and because of the change, it's a big change.
Mm-hmm.
And I just know touring, when I was touring, it was always basically a record company that did the touring, that afforded you to do the touring. And your the premise of touring was to sell records at the stores. You couldn't sell records at the venue. If you were playing at the Jubilee Auditorium, there's no way you could have records out in the lobby, because it was detriment to the stores that were supporting you. So you couldn't do that. So it really has changed. But I do have a great story about an artist. I won't mention her name, but she was signed to a label, and she did pretty good. Like in those days, she probably sold 300,000 records in 10 years. She's a Canadian artist. And she lost that deal. And then when everything started collapsing, all the big record companies, because they took a lot of money from the artists. They made a lot of money. From Celine Dion, Sony made a lot of money. So anyways, this artist started doing her own thing. She had a bit of a name though, so she did a 6-week tour across Canada, and they sold CDs off the stage. And they took 5,000 CDs, and at the end of the tour, she turned to her husband, who was a guitar player, and said, "I've never made this much money in my life." And she was signed to a deal, like a pretty substantial deal for 10 years. Because they sold 5,000 CDs at $20, they made 100 grand in 6 weeks from their own CD that they paid for. They did all the recording. So it does work. I think it's going to work, but it's taking some time, because it's new ground for as far as royalties are concerned. It's like I think we're going to figure it out though.
Right.
It's just it is new ground.
I think there's sort of also going to be a shift in the ideology of how musicians make money, whether it be from publishing or actual racks or those type of things, where we often feel that, well, I think streaming is, hurt musicians a great deal. Nobody, I think, can argue with that. We still have to remember that there are certain things that you can't stream. When you get a bunch of people in a room, not looking at a screen, but actually in a room for a live performance, you own that. That's something that nobody can stream. It doesn't matter if they film it and put it on the internet. It's still not that experience. It's not the same as actually being there. So while we feel like we're losing power, I think we're actually gaining it. Because if you're really working hard at your craft, then you have this very tangible thing that only you can give to people.
And that wasn't the case before with the huge record companies.
No.
You didn't have control of that. And that's what's great about it. Now there are some things that have to be worked out.
Yes, of course.
And I think it's going in the right direction though, because it's given the power to the artist. It's a little bit more work, and it's kind of hard to figure out. And this is what we're talking about maybe in schools, and they should be having a business, more of a business end, because actually you're doing the business now. It's not the executive at the whatever record company, right? So it is empowering, but it's also a little scary, because you don't know what you're doing, or we don't know.
If you consider the listener too, like, it's the best time it's ever been. Like, I can grab my phone over there and play you literally any recording of any song ever recorded ever in like 10 seconds, and almost for free. So the convenience part is there for the consumer. You know, and I don't want to get too political here, but when like Spotify is worth $25 billion, the record labels have sold their back catalogs for hundreds of $millions in stake in that company that keeps growing. And the highest grossing tune of 2013, Happy by Pharrell, worldwide made him $42,000 in royalties. You just feel like the industry is skewed a little bit in the wrong direction because the content producer isn't the person that is benefiting from the distribution model.
Right. So in other words, it sounds like the whole business of music is really changing. So would you say that it's important for a musician to diversify, to be able to support themselves through music? Dan, maybe you can speak to this. I know you've got a lot going on.
Absolutely. I love hearing all this about this. This is wonderful. And what came to mind too is I'm thinking of Billie Eilish won, was it 6 Grammys the other night?
Right.
And her and her brother got started in their basement, you know, and I think of Chance the Rapper and a lot of these guys that are self-funding, self-promoting, and reaping the benefits too.
Mm-hmm.
But
that wouldn't have necessarily happened 10 years ago.
And winning Grammys, like that's huge. It's crazy. But no, I think just to answer your question, I think for me, diversifying, kind of like what you were saying, Mike, that, you know, being a not just a jack of all trades, but being good at those trades, you know, upright bass and electric bass and different instruments, or I can do session, but I can also improvise and play live. I can tour. I think even for myself, I've always wanted to be a man of many hats. I wanted to be able to do a lot of things and well, and also, well, for myself, maybe I'll just back up to this. I found that doing something I love to do that pays okay will enable me to do what I really love to do. You know, doing something I love, find something I love to do that enables me to do what I really love to do. And for me, it was teaching. I'm like, okay, well, I love teaching music at these different levels. It could be private, it could be workshop, it could be high school, it could be these different levels. But I love doing this, and it pays, and I want to get good at that and diversify into all that teaching, you know, umbrella has underneath it. At the same time, now I've freed myself up to develop in these areas as a professional musician. And then even just stylistically, like I love jazz, much like yourself, Mike, and I grew up in the whole 90s alternative rock, had a punk band, all that. And then, gosh, I remember, Ryan, when I first went to Nashville, it was 2006, and it was like, I'm either going to hang up the skates or I'm going to really practice, because being on Broadway and everything, these guys are so good, and I fell in love with country music, and I fell in love with, you know, the Brent Masons and the Dan, all these guys, Johnny Highland, and it's just like, this music world is so big and so diverse, so stylistically, let's diversify, and then in terms of actually the practical making a living as a musician, you know, having kids and a mortgage and living in a northern town, I needed to find a way to enable that. And that was through education.
Nicely said.
Yeah.
Right.
You're also a writer.
Yeah.
Published.
Yeah.
What is it?
Canadian musician.
Canadian musician.
Yeah.
Right.
Have a review coming out next month, which is exciting.
Nice.
And a Quebec company.
Awesome.
Right.
Nice.
So I think there's lots that an artist can do to, you know, hone their craft, right?
Yeah.
As a musician, I think many of us want to record and get those CDs out there. Back in my day, getting a cassette tape on you know, would have been pretty awesome. But that costs some money. Have any of you had experiences accessing like grant funding to pay for recordings? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been extremely helpful. I don't think it's a mystery that the margins in the music industry at certain levels are razor thin, if not like poverty level. So having a strong granting agency, or a few of them, Canada Council, Alberta Foundation for the Arts, and Edmonton Arts Council, has been a lifesaver, because I don't think you see it as much in other industries where subsidies are given out to forestry, mining, gas, And that incentivizes that industry to grow. And then in return, in theory, those profits are reinvested in jobs or the people of the province. And I think that might be one thing people miss from those granting agencies, because there's been a couple times that we've been trying to do, another group that I had, we were trying to do some cross Canada, like a cultural intersection, and really put out this new project, and it was a year's worth of work. And if we hadn't gotten, a grant for $8,000, that might not have come to light to be able to showcase some of the stuff from Alberta. And let's be honest, like, Toronto is the epicenter of arts in the country, followed maybe by Montreal, Vancouver. Even the Maritimes has a really strong art scene. And so sometimes I think the prairies get lost in the shuffle, but there's so much. We were talking about this the other day. Winnipeg's pumping out great music, Saskatchewan, Alberta. So those granting agencies are good not just for the individual artists, but for the infrastructure of the province, as well as showcasing some of that art on like a broader scale. So I've definitely benefited from it, and it's helped move the needle like a great deal for sure, both on records and for touring as well.
That's great.
Yeah.
And I guess once you have that recording in hand, it gives you sort of like a business card, license to go, this is what I do, this is what I can do for you, right? I'm thinking about networking, business networking, and just meeting people, talking to people. How does that impact your career? And, Mike, you've mentioned a few big names, and how does one go from being, a practicing musician working real hard to someone that's connected with these names and has these types of opportunities?
Well, it's funny because I've been asked that, and we've all been asked that, like, how do you get it? I just want to be a studio musician. How do you do that? Do I just come down to the studio and just hang out? It's like, no. There was this young bass player that came. I was doing a musical in Edmonton, and he wanted to come, and I thought he was going to Grant MacEwan, but he was a high school student. And he came and he was asking those questions. He says, I don't really, he wasn't really interested in what I was talking about, or like, are you following the page or anything? He says, I just want to be a studio musician. I want to do this. I said, well, there's a lineup of people that want to do that, right? So, I mean, like, you have to go through the education, and it's not just who you know. It doesn't hurt, but you were talking about the CD being a business card, and I think that's really true. And even more these days, I think it's another example of somebody going out and doing a tour, and no, I'm not going to put anything on the internet. I'm going to keep it right here, and they're $30 each, and I'm not going to give out any free CDs. And then he came back after the tour, and it was kind of a bust. And he talked to this guy who's a music manager, and he said, yeah, but you just kept it close to your chest. You actually didn't advertise yourself with your CD. Yeah, you do have to give to receive. Sometimes you have to actually put out that, to expose it. Even though you're not getting paid maybe for that few CDs or whatever. But yeah, I think it's not just a simple kind of, there's not a simple answer to, like, how do you promote yourself. I think that it's all varied layers of things,
Right.
And
I think there's kind of a middle ground too, where past doing the hard work and trying to be, for lack of being, I don't want to be cheesy here, but being so good they can't ignore you. That kind of work ethic of trying to be as good as you possibly can be. Mentorship goes a long way. Like I saw this young kid, Josh Rizicki, in high school. I remember watching him play and thinking, wow, that kid has the whole package. And he left school and he worked really, really hard. He started playing gigs, and I caught up with him later on. And now yes, he's working hard and he's got a lot of talent, but I'm also trying to give him some opportunities that maybe he wouldn't get just from, just working hard, but the who you know part, I guess. And he's doing great.
Do you think management has anything to do with? Does one need a manager or an agent or is that a myth? Or how does one present themselves from a business point of view to show that I've got the chops, so you can see me playing, but B, I'm also a professional. What defines a professional musician, would you think?
Well, I think it's really important in certain artists to have a manager, to have somebody to take care of that for you, so that you can actually concentrate on what you need to do. But it doesn't necessarily work for everyone. And what we're saying is, like, being individuals, putting your own music out there, sometimes you have to actually do that kind of part to get it kick-started. Maybe you have to be the manager, you have to be the agent, and it's just changed so much, I think. But there's no doubt about, in my mind, that if you find a good manager, that's gonna help your career for sure, because you don't have to worry about that end of things.
Mm-hmm.
But then you get into that cycle. It's like, well, maybe I should try to find a record company. That's just changed so much, though, now.
I think there might be some lingering myths from, I know when I was a kid, it was just like you wanted to go to Los Angeles and get a record deal, and become famous. But being a professional musician might not necessarily entail that now.
Yeah,
it's quite a different thing.
True.
Yeah, I'd say it really depends what you want to do, right? For me, I don't know if I play the kind of music or even the right instrument to have a manager. But as Mike was saying, like, the times are just changing so much that it's kind of nice controlling your own career and business and finances and what you want to do. And Dan and I were talking about this earlier. Getting a little older and deciding memento mori that you've only got so much time and what do you want to be doing. And I examined this pretty recently myself, and there's kind of like a triumvirate of things that, and I think when you first start your career, maybe not a lot of people do this again, so that they can stay open-minded and just kind of taste what is out there and see what they like and don't like. But is it cool music? Is it cool people? Or is it like a ridiculous amount of money so you can supplement maybe those other two that aren't paying so well? That's kind of how I look at gigs right now, because I'm either going to enjoy the people there, or I'm going to enjoy the music a great deal, or it's going to help me financially so that I can get back to creating more of what I want to be doing. Mm-hmm. That's kind of in my control now. So again, with the shifting times of the industry right now, being managerless almost affords you the opportunity to kind of craft the direction you want to go more than ever before. Mm-hmm. It's more work, but you get to pick your direction a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. One of the things they say about business is location, location, location. Speaking of the triumvirate, Dan, you've made a good living here in Fort McMurray as a professional musician.
Yeah.
What can you say about location?
Oh my gosh, that's a great question. I think I'm one of those rare cases, and there's different sayings where like a blessing becomes a curse, or a curse becomes a blessing, or whatever, like a flip side of an equation. I moved here thinking that I was putting music second. I had certain personal reasons for coming back here after school, and I ended up everything worked out. I ended up teaching at the college. I ended up connecting with the local music scene. A lot of wonderful musicians come through Fort McMurray, and I've been through the boom and bust cycles, and been able to have huge contracts that I would not have had being a small fish in a big pond. I think of just one example, writing or producing the theme song for the Summer Games. That was a big one, and then all of that, and just getting to work with just wonderful musicians, and like, I don't know, like, you know how excellence or talent is what's the word I'm thinking of here? Like a moth to a flame. Those who are talented or excellent or have the same passions, you're drawn to one another. That's what I'm getting at. And so like I've found that in the last, we'll say 15 years, I have found like-minded people, and we've collaborated, and there's been good fruit that's been produced from that, which is like the coolest thing. And very quickly, like within the first few years of coming back here, I saw that I could actually make a living, support a family in this city, and it wasn't sight money, but it was make a living in Fort McMurray. And I thought, well, let's go all in. Let's see what can happen. And it's been like that since 2008.
That's an amazing accomplishment.
It's insane. Yeah. So thankful. Anyway, it's long-winded.
No, that's great. I'm glad you're here too, because I've had the privilege of playing shows with you.
Yeah.
I've had the privilege of studying with Thom. I've had the privilege of watching you three play music together more than once, apparently.
Yeah.
And Alberta has a pretty vibrant music culture and artistic culture.
Yeah.
Do any of you have anything you'd like to add about just the music scene or the music culture in Alberta overall?
Well, it's been good to me. Same thing. Like I got the opportunity to go down to Los Angeles and record, and I was told by producers down there, you should move down here. You should come down here. You'll work. And I never did. I've got a family in Edmonton, and we have a great life. Like Dan was saying, it's similar kind of like attracts like, and I meet great musicians all the time. I've been very fortunate to be able to play with a lot of world-class musicians living in Edmonton. So sure, opportunity sometimes opens its doors a little bit when you're living in a bigger community, and it's more difficult too, because there's just more better players, and so your competition, which is always great though, it always brings up the artistic expertise, having great musicians around, or great artists, or great writers, being in that kind of world. But I think Alberta's been great for me anyways. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, I didn't even know I could make a living. When I went to school, I was just so enchanted with music. And I had some friends that were fantastic musicians that were there ahead of me. So I kind of went into it blind. And then when I was at MacEwan, they were like, well, people make a living doing this. And I was just so like...
you can make money doing that?
Yeah. Not yet. I'll let you know when I do. I was just so myopic about my focus, and things just opened up. And I'll be honest, I don't know if you guys find this too after all these years, but every year that goes by, I'll get hired for something that some guy retired or moved on or whatever. This gig has existed for 20 years. Yeah. It's maybe like a really cool musical at a school, or it's a bunch of gigs with a Francophone community festival they do every year. Mm-hmm. And you start to realize, for me anyway, I mean, you guys have a lot more experience than I do, but there's, even at this point, more work out there, more fun, creative work than I had even imagined was there, even after all of this time. Mm-hmm. And I really like that too, because you see these pockets of people just appreciating the arts, and it just kind of revitalizes you after almost 20 years, sure. Or revitalizes me after 20 years in the business.
That's great. Well, that kind of brings me to my next question. It's like music revitalizes you, and being a professional musician. Maybe Ryan, what it is about being a professional artist and that sort of inspires you, or what's a great benefit of being a professional?
Aside from being, you are the business, you're your own boss. Aside from all of that, showing up somewhere where you don't know anybody, and maybe you brought some joy to people for a couple hours, and maybe their lives, you don't know what's going on personally, but they walk out of there feeling just a little bit better. That's really, for me, that's what it comes down to.
Yeah. Anyone else?
As long as the gig is paying.
Yeah.
No.
Well, that actually brings up a point too. as a businessman and as being a business, when would you draw the line between like, okay, I need to be paid for this versus I'm okay with,
That was a tough
either
question.
getting paid less or donating my time for this. Are there times for that, or?
Yeah, sure. I'm sure we've all done it.
Yep.
And it's not just musicians that do
Right.
that.
Right.
It's like there is a time and place for it, and there's also a time, and usually it comes with experience and age a little bit,
Right.
that you realize that, I shouldn't be doing that gig for $15. I know, we've all done that, but it's, Tom, you were talking about that. He said, like, earlier on you're willing and you want to get out there and do every kind of gig, and
Yeah.
it doesn't matter. Oh, I'm just really digging playing with all these different kinds of musicians and different kind of music, but then there comes a point where you're probably going to realize that you actually need to pick your spots a little bit, and when you do that, sometimes it's kind of like surprising. It's like, you mean you're going to pay me that much money? But okay, so if I ask for that money, you'll pay it. So the surprising sort of things happen like that too. But
Well, it's good to set a standard, at
Yeah.
least, right? I remember when I was playing for less than required Edmonton Musicians Union minimum wage. Same thing. First got out of school, I was just like, man, we're gigging. They're giving us 2 beers and a meal, mister. It's just like, wowee. And then elder statesman that's not here took me aside and said, what you're doing is not just harmful to you because you're not making enough money for what you're providing. It's hurting the rest of the musicians that are trying to have a minimum bar for their services. You're also hurting the club owner because they're getting a distorted view of the value of what you're providing as well.
exactly.
And the funny thing about worth is that it has to come from within first, and then other people see it radiate out of you. And it's weird to attach a dollar figure to that. But the truth is, it takes a lot of hours of practice and work to be good and put a good product out. And I know musicians don't like talking about it a lot because they feel like it cheapens their art. But frankly, I think that's a load of nonsense. And you have to value what you do. So this person told me, no, you have to be charging this much. And after a talk, I was like, okay, fine, I'll charge that much. And I was just like, no one's gonna hire me. Like, I'm not as experienced as this guy. I can't do what this guy does. But as soon as I set the bar at that level, everyone was just like, oh, he has set this bar for himself here. And it's like they almost respect you more, the club owner, the other musicians, and you start to take more pride in your own craft because you're providing a service at that level. Does that kind of make sense?
That makes complete sense.
I think it's important for people to set that bar and be really honest with themselves about it, because it's something people don't like talking about money, especially artists, I find. And I think it's really important to have a frank conversation with yourself about what you feel your time is worth, and then you're not going to have resentment about it later on when you're saying yes or no to certain gigs.
Which kind of dovetails back to that business question and why it's important. And you're right. Like, I mean, it's no secret that musicians have been terrible businessmen, or people, in the past. And that's the thing that colleges, the education can help, more well-rounded person, not just the business side of things, but all kinds of, in all kinds of ways.
I was just thinking as Tom and now Mike was talking, I had such a different experience because I went to music school young. So when I was out, it was like, don't take a bad gig, don't give yourself away for free. So it would be hard pressed to find, okay, these were gigs that I took that were for exposure or for a good connection. Like, I had it kind of drilled in me where it was like, I'm a real estate agent. This is my rate. Here's my charity rate if it's a charitable cause. Yep. Here's what a corporate gig. Here's a bar gig. Here's a kind of like I had all these different thresholds worked out, and I still had this like eager, like, what's the gig? The answer is yes, no matter what. What's the question? The answer is yes. Like I was open to like, you want me to dress up in a what for a kid's what? Okay, yeah. It's like totally like take the gig, but it was like this was the like financial criteria that I needed, and that was totally school. Like that was all school. Yeah.
That's great. Well, I guess we'll wrap things up now. There's been so much great information that I think that you've basically answered all of my questions. I hope we answered everybody else's questions out there. Do you guys have anything else you want to add before we wrap things up? Any last comments?
Aside from just saying thanks to everyone for being involved and for the ACWB for having us up here, I'm kind of curious. We talked about it a little bit like informally before the cameras were rolling, but in terms of invigorating Fort McMurray's music community, because it did have the program before, and obviously that has a magnetic pull to it. What do you guys as residents, like longtime residents, what do you think would be the most beneficial things for the city to do to sort of vitalize or revitalize the music community? Is it getting a music program back here?
I can't speak to about the college, but I think that the arts community here is very active. There's always something going on. You know, there's all sorts of different types of arts going on. People working together. I think that that's probably one of the strongest or most beneficial tactics you could take is just working together. You know, whether you're a bass player working with a painter or you're a dancer working with a writer. You know, I think that there's always infinite possibilities of working together and just making it more beneficial for everyone as a group.
Right.
Nice.
And I think just to kind of say it on tape, what I was saying to you, Tom, like I really have the sense that there is something that's going to change. And I don't just think it's the economics of our province or this city, but I think just from our mayor through council, just thinking of the people involved at the different high schools, our president at the college here with our new gallery that we're kind of hoping will happen. You can really start to see, okay, well, if this happens, then this will happen, and then this program, and then we'll have a certificate program, and you can kind of start to see a domino effect. You know, and even at the like local level, like at the high school level, thinking of both the Catholic high schools and the public high schools, there's just leadership and those that are in charge. There's a sense that we want more arts, and we want to grow the arts in the city. And I mean, it's great having an arts council. You know, you work there, so it's great having. We're grateful for you, but like there is the. I definitely have the sense that like it's not necessarily another boom, but it's like something that might be more tangible at this point. But
Cool. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for joining us and sharing your thoughts and your tips and your wisdom. Thank you, everyone who's watched this video right till the very end. You know, we're Arts Council Wood Buffalo. Thank you for joining us as part of the Business of the Arts program, and we'll hope to see you for more of these conversations in the future. Thank you.